Thank you, Bonnie. Hello, hello.
Sylvia, how are you?
Thank you. Okay. How are you doing?
Baruch Hashem. Baruch
Yeah.
Hashem.
You don't
So
have to
far,
run
so
around a
good.
lot. You don't have to run around a lot in this weather, do you?
No, I don't do a lot of running around a lot, except this is the day that I'm away every week. But otherwise,
Yeah.
no. I mean, I'd love to visit people, but I can't, right? So
Right.
what? No, I can't. With snow. I mean, if I was allowed to visit people, I wouldn't let the snow bother me. But I'm not allowed to visit people, so what am I going to do?
Oh, yeah, right.
I'm hoping to get myself on the vaccine list. Have you been vaccinated yet, Sylvia?
No, I have not. My daughter is working on
I mean,
trying to
because you're
get
over
me.
75, the doors are
Yeah,
supposed to
I
be open.
definitely am over 75, but I can't get an appointment. You can't reach them.
Okay, so hopefully, so your daughter's on the
Yes,
on top of things. That's great.
Elaine in New York has a broader picture of what's going on, and she's keeping with it to try to get me an appointment.
No, very good. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
there's a website you can ask there's a Massachusetts website, and
yeah,
you
yeah.
can look around, and your daughter here or someone can take you wherever you need to go, even if it is a few miles. You know what I mean?
That's exactly what we're looking at. She's looking at the whole picture from where she is.
Great.
She's getting, she's
Yeah, I
getting
know
the.
my parents had their appointment pushed off too. So in New York. So yeah,
Yeah, here I couldn't even reach the health department.
yeah,
You know.
it's a bit still disorganized. Hopefully, it will get better.
Yeah.
Okay, so we all have a very short amount of time. So as always on this in this little class, so I'm gonna start. So Yitro, we discussed Yitro and his involvement. And now he wakes up. Now, Vihima Machrat, it was on the morning. So Rashi says this really was the morning after Yom Kippur, after the giving of the Torah, and after the golden calf. So this is placed because it's something Yitro did. The Torah took it out of its historical place and put it here because we don't discuss Yitro a lot afterwards. So Eve Macharat, it was the next day. So some people say it's the next day after he came. Some people say it was the day after Yom Kippur. Vayeshev Moshe lishpot ta'am. And Moshe sat down to judge the people. There's 3 million people. They have a fair share of disputes. Vayamodam Moshe. So the people stood over Moses. Minabokar from morning to the evening. Vayarchot ein Moshe kol hashot. Why? Because everyone wanted. You know how like all Jews, they want to go only to the best doctor. So no, everyone wanted to go to Moses to hear their problems, to have their problems solved. So Moshe's father-in-law saw this as kol hasha'osa la'am, everything that he did with the people. Vayomer, he said, Ma dovas la'am. What are you doing with the people? Matua do you shave levadecha? Why are you sitting all alone? And people are standing on you from morning to evening. Vayomer Moshe lechot. Moshe said to his father-in-law, they come to me to inquire of God or to inquire of justice. When they have an issue, whether it's an issue with another person or an issue in understanding all these new mitzvot they were given, right? A whole new Judaism, a whole new religion. For shafatati, so either I judge between man and his fellow, or I let them know the statutes of God and his laws. As you know, there's a lot of details in Judaism, and a lot of those details cropped up right after the basic mitzvot were given. Vayomer chota Moshe Elav, and Moshe's father-in-law told him, Lo tova davar shatosa. It's not good what you're doing. In other words, he says, in other words, why does it say, well, it doesn't say Vayomer, it says Chosei Moshe. In other words, Yitro knew Moshe, and Yitro knew Moshe's proclivities, and he says, you know what, you're very dedicated, but this will burn you out. Novel Tibo, you will wear out, you and also the people. The people will get worn out from waiting forever for an answer, and they'll get frustrated, and they may take matters into their own hands. And you can't do this all day. You'll wear out too. This is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone. So Yitro is telling Moshe that as much as you know you're the best guy for the job, and as much as you know what God told you, it's impossible for the people and for yourself to just have one person to rely on. And this is a very big deal. And he says, well, I want to take care of everyone. They say, well, the only way you can take care of everyone is by training people, if they're not going to be you, to at least be of your quality. In other words, of your integrity. In other words, you just can't handle it. And there's an interesting. Where does the Ramban go? Just one moment. Yeah. Right. It's not. I'm sorry, it wasn't the Ramban. Ramban. It was yeah. So the Chizkuni is the one who said this. Chizkuni says you'll ultimately, novel tibul doesn't mean you'll wear out. He says you'll ultimately get confused. In other words, you'll reach a point where your brain isn't functioning anymore. So Ata Shema B'Koli. Let me give you advice. I'll give you advice. Let God be with you. In other words, check with God. You stand before God. You bring, in other words, when you have a question that you need God to answer you, you go to God. And you'll teach them the chukim, the laws, and the Torah, and the teachings. And you'll teach them the way to go and what to do. In other words, you'll speak to Hashem, and then you'll tell the people whatever you hear for Hashem. But what if they need to know details? What if they have arguments about these laws of integrity and business and theft and so on? The Atatech is that you should see, in other words, you should see the right people. You should choose from all the people, Anshe Chayil, people of bravery. In other words, they have to be tough because they'll have to tell people what they don't want to hear. Fearing of God, true people, Sonei Vatsa, who hate money. Now, what does that mean? They're not excited about money because even if they're very honest, if they like money, they're always able to be bribed. They have to be people who just don't care that much about money. For some Talem, you shall place upon them heads of thousands, heads of hundreds, heads of 50, heads of 10. So in other words, every 10 families is someone they go to, and that guy can't solve the problem. They go to the 100 person, then the 50s, then the hundreds, then the thousands. Then if no one knows an answer, so then you go to Moshe. But Moshe, you should get the general instruction from Hashem. Train these people. In other words, if they're men of, so let's go through this. If they're brave, they'll give the right answer. If they're God-fearing, they'll take their job seriously and carefully analyze what they answer. If they're men of truth, they'll know when they're out of their depth, right? And they'll come to you or to the next person up. And so Nevatza, they have to be unbribable. They have to be incorruptible. How do you make someone incorruptible? Where they don't really care that much about money in the first place. So someone who's a really good businessman and really loves likes making money, that's not a good person, even if he knows all the information. And let them judge the people at every time. And every little thing you'll bring to you, the big things they'll bring to you, and the small things, which means anything they can handle, they'll judge. And they will carry the burden with you. So if you do this thing, and God will command you, in other words, if God agrees with me, says Yisro, you'll be able to endure. And these people will come to their place. They'll come to the land of Israel in peace. And Moshe listened to his father-in-law, and he did everything that he said, which means to say that he consulted with Hashem, and it actually, this appears in Devarim, and God agrees. So Moshe chose able men, brave men, and he made them heads of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. And they judged the people at all time and taught them and answered their questions. And everything difficult they brought to Moshe, and the little things which couldn't be answered, could be answered up to the level of the heads of thousands, they did. And Moshe let his father-in-law go, and he went back to his land. So later in Balotcha, we see that Moshe wants Yitro to stay. So some people say this is the same event. This all took place after Yom Kippur, and that's when Yitro went home. And as we discussed in the Haftarah last week, and we'll continue discussing this week, the descendants of Yitro may have been Jews. They certainly were Noahides, and they lived on the periphery of the land of Israel as nomads. And one of them, the wife of Hever the Canaanite, Yael, kills Sisera. We read about it in the Haftarah, and we'll discuss it more thoroughly. So the basic point over here is that though Moshe may have been the best qualified, not only, now why do we call them heads of thousands, heads of fifties, heads of hundreds? It's not just because that's the amount of families they were responsible for, but there's a deeper reason. And the deeper reason is because when everything goes to Moshe, so we don't develop the analytical abilities, the judicial abilities, the leadership abilities of everyone else. There's Moshe and everyone else. So Yitro said, sooner or later you're going to get mixed up. What you need is to bring out the abilities of everyone. In other words, there are people who can accomplish a great deal, who can acquire a lot of knowledge, who can be effective leaders. As long as they're all blinded by your light, they're not going to do that. So you have to withdraw. And it's interesting to note that what he says is, what he's telling to him is, you have to withdraw a little bit because you need to make room for everyone to develop to the ultimate level that they can develop. That's your job, Moshe, that they all grow in Torah and in Menschlichkeit and in good characteristics and in leadership abilities to the extent they can. And that's the truth, that the truly greatest leaders of the Jewish people are the ones who themselves created leaders and caused people to become leaders in their own communities and with others. That's the true greatness of a leader. And Yitro prompts Moshe to do this. And it's interesting. It's interesting to note that the Ibn Ezra says that Novel Tibol means to say the way the leaves fall off the tree. In other words, Novel Tibol, sooner or later, Moshe, the leaf will fall off the tree. Sooner or later, you'll reach the winter of your life and you'll pass away. So the Ibn Ezra seems to be hinting to something over here, though he doesn't say it explicitly. The time will come, Moshe, while you're not here. So if everyone's relying on a Moshe, and that's all you have, so when there's no Moshe, what are you going to do? The people will be lost. And therefore, Yitro tells him, you need to create a system that you can imbue so much of yourself and so much of your teaching of Torah into the people that when you die, the system will continue because you have distributed your knowledge and your leadership in a way that it resonates within thousands upon thousands of people who are leaders. And again, this is the way that the Jewish people have made it from generation to generation. And very often, when a great leader leaves the scene, you may not find anyone as great as him for a long time. But the fundamental system is working because he's trained the people to follow this system and to pursue these values, and he's provided them with enough knowledge, enough of a system to do so. So Yitro is also telling Moshe, you got to set up a system where Moshe is there even when Moshe isn't there. And this is of course what ultimately happens, and it's the secret of the survival of the Jewish people. Okay, thank you all for joining us. If anyone has a question, now's the time. We'll go 2 minutes over if anyone wants to ask something.
Rabbi, why do you think Moshe couldn't see that for himself?
So I think that Moshe was so caught up in his mission to be the conduit between Hashem and the people, that he wasn't willing to accept compromise. In other words, as if it were, he felt that he had to do his best. Along comes Yitro and says, and tells him, well, there are other considerations here, and why don't you ask Hashem? So in a sense, even Moshe, when you're caught up in doing what you need to do, it's as if you can't let go of it until someone tells you, well, maybe Hashem wants you to let go of it. I think that's part of it. I think that Moshe sought perfection at his own expense. And Yitro says that for your own sake and for the sake of the Jewish people, having someone perfect temporarily is not as important as having a collective thing. But I think Moshe himself didn't see how he could walk away from his responsibility until Yitro inspires him to ask of Hashem. And Hashem, you know what, he's right. Because even the greatest person becomes caught up in their mission and their purpose. And sometimes someone has to tell them, it's like, we find this in many cases throughout Jewish history, that sometimes someone who's not on the level of the leader has to point out, because the leader is completely consumed with what they are doing. And I think the other lesson here is that everyone has to learn from everyone, and even Moshe can miss something simply because of his dedication, and someone else has to tell him. So because Moshe is always willing to listen to another person, it can happen. So did Moshe know this academically? Probably. But he couldn't tear himself away until such time someone said something to him. And since Moshe knew when any time someone says something to you, you have to take it seriously, he was able to look at it from a different angle.
Rabbi, isn't this also the pattern that the Sanhedrin adopted? One judge, two judges, three judges, different levels. Right,
and ultimately Moshe later in the Torah set up the Sanhedrin of 71. So because when you have a lot of people, even if none of them is a Moshe, when very many people put their heads to something, you can sometimes get it. It's like with computers. You can either build a super processor, or you can divide up the problem and give it to a lot of ordinary computers to do, and each one works on part of the problem, and collectively they're as effective as a supercomputer. So in this case, Hashem is teaching Moshe that the other is the more durable way, because if there's no Moshe and Moshe's everything, you have a disaster. If one component fails, one person fails, there's still a lot of other good people out there. Okay, so have a wonderful day, everyone. And as I mentioned, we did study Monday. We will not be studying Wednesday, but for the rest of the month, it's Mondays off, Wednesdays on. Take care, everyone. And tonight we continue studying the Song of Devorah. We're going to study that Haftarah until we finish it, because it's a very, very important part of the Tanakh. Okay, everyone, all the best. Have a great day.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.